everyone and welcome to today's video. And in this video I will be taking you through some books again. Today I would like to talk to you about some of my favorite books in a Victorian setting, and I thought I'd take you through 5 of my favorite books that are written and set in the 19th century, then some books that were written in the current day but that are set in the 19th century, and then also some books that I have on my TBR. So yeah, there's quite a bit to get to, so without further ado, let's get to the books. So the first set of books that I'm holding up right now are the books that are actually written in the 19th century and that for the most part are also set in the 19th century. The first one is Robert Louis Stevenson, Dr. Jeckyll and Mr. Hyde. It's a very short book and it's very, very entertaining. It probably doesn't have the same effect anymore that it used to have because I believe that people were quite terrified at the time because of the setting this has. Another classic, and my copy is very well loved, as you can tell. It even has some water damage here. And this is Stoker's Dracula. I love, that whole, gothic vampire setting. It's just one I really love. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether this is actually set during the Victorian era, but Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte is definitely one that was written in the 19th century. Finally got around to reading the original, and I absolutely adored it. Again, it has a bit of a gothic element there, and I really like the exploration of, the role of a woman in that time period. We cannot talk about Victorian settings without addressing Mr. Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. I do have to say I haven't read many of the stories, but I did see a lot of adaptations, like the Sherlock series that BBC does, for instance, and some others. I did manage to read all of the stories in this little bind-up of the adventures and the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, and I do really, really like these stories. It gives you a very nice idea of what London was like at the end of the 19th century. My final book in this category of books written in the 19th century and mostly set in the 19th century is this crazy 1970s edition of a collection of Edgar Allan Poe stories. Stories like Telltale Heart, Fall of the House of Usher, all of those elements, all of those stories contain elements that I think a lot of authors sort of continued on with and explored more in other gothic fiction. And then the second stack that I'm holding here, and then this second stack that I'm holding up are the books that are written in current day times, but that are definitely set in a Victorian setting. Again, not all of these are set in England per se, but the first one is, it's not set in London, but it's set in Manchester mostly, and also in the Crimea. I never know how to say this. A journalist that's trying to solve the case, and he's moved from London to Manchester to, in search of a more quiet life. That doesn't really work out for him. And this is called The Street Philosopher by Matthew Plampin. There's a lot of historical research that actually went into this. I cannot talk about the Victorian era without, again, addressing vampires. This is Michael Sims' collection of Victorian vampire stories. It's called Dracula's Guest. It just has a lot of different vampire stories from the 19th century from all around, and it sort of explores the development of the vampire story leading up to Stoker's Dracula. By far one of the most ingenious books that I've read that are set in a late 19th, early 20th century setting is this. This is Selden Edwards' The Little Book. This actually contains a little bit of time traveling, which is actually a very interesting concept. This guy, he's a rock star, I believe, in the 1970s or early 80s, and then suddenly he wakes up and he wakes up in fin de siècle, Austria, Vienna. It's a really nice sort of mixture of the intellectual power of Vienna before World War I. I love a good detective from time to time, and especially if it's set in Victorian London, then I can definitely enjoy it. This is Alex Grecian's The Yard, which is set around H Division just after the Jack the Ripper murders. It has a little bit of forensic experts in there, that's sort of coming up the whole science aspect of trying to catch a murderer. This is a continuing series, and I'm sure I'll be picking up more books in this series as it goes along. Last but not least in this section of the video is the Infernal Devices series. I just picked up Clockwork Angel to hold up to you, but the entire Infernal Devices series by Cassandra Clare is completely set in Victorian London. I really, really preferred this over Mortal Instruments because it just has a much nicer setting. It works a lot better with the entire Shadowhunter world. and I really, really liked the way this story was told and the characters in it. And last but not least, we have the to be read list. So my TBR when it comes to Victorian settings. And the first one here is Genevieve's Cogman, The Masked City. The first one in this series is The Invisible Library, I believe. And someone recommended I read that before this one. But this one actually particularly mentions the fact that this is set in an alternative Victorian London. That's pretty much what made me pick this up. And yeah, I'm looking forward to starting this series. I picked up the first one just a few weeks ago when I was in London, so I can get started on this. Another book that I picked up while I was in London is Jack London's The People of the Abyss. Jack London was an author and journalist during the 19th century, and he actually lived in East London for a bit and wrote down what his experiences were living amongst the poor. Just like the first stack, there's a couple of classics that are still in my TBR. The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins is one of the best ghost stories written in the late 19th century. So that's something that I really, really, really definitely want to read as well. I love ghost stories, and this is just one of those books that I've been having on my shelf for quite some time, but I just never seem to get round to it. So I'm not sure whether this also counts as a classic, but it's definitely a Penguin classic, so I guess that makes it one. This is Charles Roberts Maturin's Melmoth the Wanderer. This was published in the early 19th century, actually, so I don't think it really counts as Victorian. This guy seems to live like 1,000 years. I mean, he seems to be living in different time periods, and he sold his soul to the devil, it seems. So yeah, that's a good read, I guess. And then the last book in here, I found this in the YA section. This is set in Victorian New York, and this is by Jennifer Donnelly, and it's called These Shallow Graves. I just love the cover of this when I saw it. And this is about a girl, and I believe her dad disappears or dies, and then she starts figuring out what happened to him. Me liking 19th century settings, especially if it has to do with cities, I thought this would be a good one. So those were 15 books with a roughly Victorian setting, I think. I did kind of take it as a very broad concept here, I guess. But that is definitely one of the time periods that if something says Victorian or 19th century, and especially if it's England or London, that just makes me buy books. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. Check back next week. I try to upload a new video every single Sunday. And yeah, please subscribe if you want to see more by me. I hope you have a great day. Bye.